Once upon a time, there were a king and a queen who were married. The king had a daughter named Anne, and the queen had a daughter named Kate. Now, Anne was much prettier than Kate, and the queen was not very happy about this. She felt her daughter was overshadowed by her stepsister. But as for Anne and Kate themselves, they were the best of friends. They spent all day together. They would not be parted from each other. Now, time went on and the queen became more and more discontented with the situation until she decided something must be done. So she went to the hen wife and explained everything to her and asked for advice. And the hen wife said, "There may be a way I can help you. Tomorrow morning, send Anne to me and tell her to come fasting, and then we'll see what we shall see." So the next morning, the queen called Anne and said, "I need you to go to the hen wife and get me some eggs, but you must not eat breakfast before you go." So Anne agreed and set off. But on her way out of the castle, she stopped at the kitchens, swiped a crust of bread, and munched it as she walked along the road. She ended up at the hen wife's house and knocked and asked if she could have some eggs, and the hen wife invited her in and said, "Well, dearie, what I need you to do is look in that pot on the boil over there and tell me what you see." So Anne went over to the pot and she lifted up the lid and looked into the pot. But she said, "I don't see anything." And the hen wife said, "You go home to your mother and you tell her that her larder door is not closed properly." So Anne went home and she told the queen what the hen wife had said. And the queen tried again the next day. She called Anne to her and she said, "I need you to go for eggs again. But this time you absolutely must not eat breakfast before you go." And Anne agreed, and off she set. And she walked along the road until she came across some people who were harvesting peas, and she started up a conversation with them. And the people were very friendly, and they offered her some peas to snack on. So she munched on them as she went. Finally, Anne arrived at the hen wife's house, and the hen wife again asked her to go and look in the pot, and Anne lifted up the lid and looked in the pot, and nothing happened. Well, the hen wife was starting to get a little bit annoyed, and she said, "You go home and you tell your mother that the pot will not boil if there's no fire." Anne really didn't understand this at all, but she went home and told her stepmother what the hen wife had said. The next morning, the queen took Anne by the hand and escorted her to the hen wife's place so that she could be sure that Anne wouldn't eat anything along the way. And they arrived there, and again the hen wife said, "Oh, just go over to that pot and take a look in." And Anne went to the pot and she lifted up the lid, and this time a sheep's head hopped out of the pot and replaced Anne's own head, which fell off, so that Anne now had a sheep head. Well, the queen was very happy about this, and she took Anne and she led her back to the castle to show her off to everyone. But as soon as Kate saw her sister, she wrapped Anne's head in a linen cloth, and she took Anne by the hand. And she said, "Well, we're going now. We're off to seek our fortune." And nothing could persuade her otherwise. So off they went, Anne and Kate, off into the world. And they walked and they walked and they walked along the road until they came to another castle. And Kate led Anne up to the castle, and she knocked on the door, and it was opened by a butler who said, "Can I help you?" And Kate said, "Well, I was just looking for lodging for my sick sister and me, just for the night." And the butler said, "Well, of course, everybody is welcome here, but I do have to warn you, that the king who owns this castle is in a little bit of a situation right now. You see, he has two sons, and one of his sons is very ill. No one can figure out why. And Kate said, really? Well, what kind of illness is it? And the butler said, well, we don't know. He seems to be wasting away, and every night he gets worse. The king has been asking people to stay with him, but every time someone does, the person has vanished by the morning, never to be seen again. And Kate thought about this for a little bit, and she said, all right, show us to our rooms, and then take me to see the king. So the butler showed them to their rooms, and then took Kate to the king, who was sitting in his throne room. And Kate approached him and said, Your Majesty, I would like the chance to sit with your son tonight. And the king said, are you sure? It's a very dangerous position, young lady. Bad things happen to the people who do this. And Kate said, oh, I'm not afraid. Just let me try. So that night, Kate was installed in the prince's room. She sat beside the fire as the prince slept in his bed. And for a while, nothing happened. But at midnight, the prince arose from his bed and headed out of the room, and Kate followed him without him noticing her. The prince walked as if in a dream to the stables, and he saddled his horse, and he called his hound, and he leapt up onto the back of his horse, and Kate, again without him noticing, leapt up behind him. And they rode out of the castle into the green wood. And as they rode, Kate reached up into the tree branches around her, and she plucked nuts from the trees, and she put the nuts in her apron. And they kept riding until they came to a green hill. And then the prince stopped, and he struck the side of the hill with a stick, and he called out, green hill, open for the prince and his horse and his hound. And Kate whispered behind him, and his lady behind him. And the green hill opened, and they rode into the mountain. Well, inside was a vast, lovely chamber full of lights and music and dancing people. All of the fairy folk were dancing in the mountain. And the prince lighted from his horse, and the fairies surrounded him and pulled him into the dance. But they didn't notice Kate. And Kate slipped from the back of the horse, and she hid behind a door, and she watched. And what she saw was the prince dancing and dancing and dancing all night. And when he became exhausted, he fell down on a couch, and the fairies would fan him until he rose and danced again. And this went on for hours, until finally the dawn was coming, and the prince left the dance. And he mounted his horse again, and Kate slipped up behind him, and they rode out of the hill and through the wood and back to the castle. Now the next morning, the king and all of his court came to the room to see how the prince had fared and how Kate had fared, and what they found was Kate sitting by the fire cracking nuts. And the king said, everything is okay? And Kate said, oh, yes, the prince had a quiet night. It was fine. Would you like me to do this again tomorrow? And the king said, yes, I think that would be great. And Kate said, well, I would ask you of one thing. My price has gone up a little bit. First night was free. The second night, I'll need a peck of gold from you. And the king happily agreed to that. So the next night, Kate again sat in the chamber of the prince as he slept, and she sat by the fire, waiting. And at the stroke of midnight, the prince got up out of his bed, and he went down to the stables, and he saddled his horse, and he called his hound. And he leapt up onto the back of the horse, and Kate leapt up as well. And then they set off through the green wood, and as they went, Kate picked the nuts from the trees, and she put them in her apron. And they came to the green hill, and the prince struck the side of the hill with a stick, and he called out, green hill, open for the prince and his horse and his hound. And Kate said, and his lady behind him. And into the hill they rode, and the prince joined the dance. And once again Kate slipped from the back of the horse, but this time she hid behind the door, but she didn't watch the prince. She watched the fairies. Because there were many. They were dancing, but some of them were also sitting by the side of the room spinning. And there was a baby fairy who was playing on the floor with a wand. It was fascinated by this wand, and Kate watched the baby for a while, and as she did so, she heard two old fairies talking to each other. And one of them said, "Oh, you know what, dear, do you see that baby there?" And the second fairy said, "Yes, I do see the baby there." "Well, do you see the wand that the baby's playing with?" "Oh, yes, it's an interesting wand." "Well, did you know that if Kate had that wand and she hit her sister with that wand 3 times, her sister would be as well as ever she'd been?" "I did not know that. How interesting." And they continued their conversation. Well, Kate listened to this very carefully. And she crouched down beside the door, and she took the nuts out of her apron, and she rolled them towards the fairy baby, nut after nut, until the fairy baby let go of the wand. And Kate, quick as lightning, pounced upon it, snatched up the wand, and hid it in her apron with the rest of the nuts. Now the dawn came, and the prince came back to his horse, and Kate leapt up behind him, and off they rode, arriving at the castle just as the sun was about to rise. And Kate immediately went to her sister's room, and she took the wand, and she struck Anne on the head with the wand 3 times. And the sheep's head fell off, and Anne's own pretty head popped back on, and Anne was as well as she'd ever be. So then Kate hurried back to the prince's room, and when the king and all his court came to see how the night had gone, Kate was sitting there cracking nuts. And the king said, "Things went well then." And Kate said, "Oh, yes, things were even better than they were last night. Would you like me to do this for one more night?" And the king said, I would like that." And Kate said, "My price has once more gone up. If you want me to do this one more time, you're going to have to give me your son's hand in marriage." And the king agreed happily to this. So it was arranged that Kate would watch for one more night, and she did. That next night, Kate sat by the fire as the prince slept in the bed. And everything happened as before. At midnight, the prince rose, and he went to the stable. And Kate followed him, and the prince saddled his horse and called his hound, and leapt up onto the back of his horse, and Kate leapt up behind him, and they rode through the green wood. And as they went, Kate reached up, and she picked the nuts from the trees, and she put them in her apron. They arrived at the green hill, and the prince took the stick and hit the side of the hill and said, green hill, open for the prince and his horse and his hound." And Kate whispered, "and his lady behind him." And the hill opened up, and they rode into it. And the prince joined the dance. And once more Kate slipped from the back of the horse and hid behind the door, and she listened to the fairies talk. And once more that fairy baby was down on the floor playing, this time with a birdie. And the 2 old fairies were talking about it, and the first old fairy said, "Oh, dear, do you see that baby again?" "Oh, yes, I do see the baby again." "Do you see the birdie that baby is playing with?" "I do see that birdie. What an interesting birdie." "Did you know, my dear, that if the prince had 3 bites of that birdie, he would be as well as ever he'd been. How interesting! I did not know that at all. So Kate listened very closely to this, and she crouched down beside the door, and she pulled out the nuts, and she rolled them towards the baby, nut after nut after nut, until almost all of the nuts were gone. And finally, the baby dropped the birdie, and quick as lightning, Kate pounced on it and hid it in her apron. And then the dance ended, and the prince got back on the horse, and Kate got up behind him, and they rode back to the castle and went to his room. Well, the prince crawled back into bed, but Kate, instead of cracking nuts by the fire, this time took the birdie, and she wrung its neck, and she plucked it, and then she roasted it over the fire. And before long, the smell of the birdie wafted out over the room, and the prince started up on his bed, and he said, "Oh, if only I had a taste of that birdie!" And Kate offered him a bite of the birdie, and he fell back in his bed again. And she continued to cook the birdie until the prince started up again and said, "Oh, if only I had another bite of that birdie!" And Kate gave him a second bite of the birdie. And once more the prince subsided, and once more Kate cooked the birdie until the prince could stand it no longer, and he said, "Oh, if only I had one more bite of that birdie!" And Kate offered him a third bite of the birdie, and after that the prince sprang from the bed completely well. Well, when the king and the court arrived a few minutes later, what they found was Kate and the prince sitting by the fire cracking nuts together. In the meantime, the prince's brother had run into Anne and had fallen madly in love with her, and she with him. So the next day they held a wedding for the both of them. And the two couples lived happy, and they died happy, and they never drank out of a dry cappy.